There is an urgent need for psychological first aid for refugee mothers and children. That's why it came to me to ask you to help us. But maybe Defne can say something. What is the plan? Because you'll be in several languages, translated simultaneously.
Maybe I can give as you said, Sonia, like the framework of
Please.
who we are and why we are reaching out. To start with, all this is really started with Sonia's initiation and calling for with Marta's actually urgent need in Poland when they started to receive, unfortunately, the refugees immediately during the war, the last week. And then as the Somatic Experiencing Community, the Somatic Experiencing Europe associations and the America SEI, Somatic Experiencing International, we immediately created a task force. So we were coming together. Of course, we have resources, but we don't want to be rushing and we don't want to be activated ourselves. And we just want to be titrating the action and realize what is the first steps, short-term, mid-term, long-term interventions, and what needs to be taken care of. As the organization with a lot of supporters, helpers, therapists are out there, we also want to focus on primarily, as Marta is probably going to speak more of, what should be careful about when helping the refugees in the very first shock moments now. Yeah. And then once we can speak about all this, we hope to translate this conversation or the information, the valuable information you're going to share into many different languages, Romanian, Polish, Hungarian, Ukrainian, that the local people can also hear, maybe even the refugees themselves, or we can also address the therapists or first responders who are helping, reaching out to these people and who may also understand and utilize this information in the best way they can.
Yeah, I can add also a few words. For now, we have already 1,200,000 refugees. They cross the border. And the situation is really, we have a lot of chaos in the country. And also, a lot of Polish people are afraid of the war. And I know at least, some of my clients and also other people, as I heard, they have, the backpack prepared and they are, ready to just also go and to escape Poland into another country because they don't know what will happen next, or, if the war will just spread into our territory. So this is also, the underlying condition. So somehow the shock is about refugees, but also it's about a shock that Polish citizens have, also the whole transgenerational trauma, sorry for my English, which is also as a memory of the Second War and what Polish people just, faced as citizens, because a lot of people need to move from Ukraine to Poland, and the part of Poland at that time was taken by Ukraine. So a lot of things is there. So I am also thinking about Polish citizens as well.
Yeah. I had some interaction with people from Poland. There's a community of therapists that use the Safe and Sound protocol.
Yes.
And Carolina, who I think you may have met, sent me an email, and I connected her with the head of the company that distributes it, and they're waiving subscription fees for several months to enable the therapist to get access to it. And then they're trying to get resources to send headsets as well. So it's a shared agenda for all of us, and we're all trying to do whatever we can. It's difficult. So I think all I can do is kind of share with you what I think is going on that might be able to be helpful, at least in understanding your own reaction. So let's go to the point that Marta was making, and that is transgenerational trauma. So even if there weren't refugees, the action so close to the borders of these Eastern European countries is really a trigger to a transgenerational trauma. And it can be destabilizing to their own physiology. And now they're under a feeling of moral responsibility to be helpful to humanity, and their physiological resource as therapists may be challenged before they can even get started. And we're going to talk a little bit about that before we start talking about the refugees who are in dire need of support. The first point is that threat is real. I mean, this is not a, quote, a faulty neuroception. This is real threat. And with threat, our bodies respond. And when our bodies respond, it gets broadcasts from our body to those around us. So to start off with, the therapists who are in their benevolent state, wanting to be helpful and accessible and embrace and create the support for the refugees, they have to also be aware that trauma can be locked or triggered in their own bodies. So this becomes the first step. And the first step that I always, since, remember, I'm not the therapist, but I am a person who kind of deconstructs what therapy does. The first step is functionally to honor your own body, totally honor it and be understanding, be aware of it. And again, we live in a culture that has always said, don't respect what your body's telling you, just go ahead and push forward and do the job. The issue in being a sensitive, compassionate therapist is your body cannot be in a state of threat. So self-compassion and self-care is where it all starts, even though there's, in a sense, an imperative to do the work. We have to understand and respect that to do the work requires a body that's not broadcasting threat.
Yes.
Tough challenge. But remember, when we come from, and we all come from, a traumatized history in different degrees, but in Poland and all the Eastern European countries, the trauma is not that far removed in time. So acknowledge that. And of course, when the refugees are coming in, the cues, even watching the videos in the US, their faces, their, in a sense, bewilderment is overwhelming. And when you see the movies of what their homeland is being, it's a violation of one's own personal space. And when it is personal space physically, we call it rape or abuse. And now you see it in this really large, systematic way. And it's also a fear, just like any marginalized or traumatized individual. It's a fear of loss of voice, that no one hears you. So we know once we deal with the therapist, we have this real deep understanding that the refugees coming in need a voice. They need to be heard. They need to be witnessed. And that means they need to feel that they are real. They're not a pawn in an activity or that they're there for, in a sense, someone to take care of them. They need to feel witnessed and connected, which means they need to trust. And so cues of trust become the major thing. Now, whether we talk about cues of trust to parents or cues of trust to children, or how do we support parents sufficiently that they dissipate their stress and trauma in them and now can broadcast cues of safety and support to their children. These are tough questions, but it's a roadmap. And within the world of, let's say, somatic experiencing and somatic oriented therapies, that's the roadmap that you've been well trained in. So the roadmap is create the safety in the individual, create the safety in the therapist, create the safety in the individual, and then allow, now this goes to the polyvagal perspective, allow co-regulation to occur, allow people to feel safe, literally or figuratively, in the arms of another. And that's, in a sense, they carry with you a visualization that you're doing your job when the mother and the infant's bodies can conform to each other and feel safe enough to give up the vigilance that gets stimulated in a body that's under threat. So once the bodies of the mother and the child conform, you know that good things are happening. So to me, it's about first taking care of yourself as a therapist, understanding that you are broadcasting the feelings that are in your body, and you have to, in a sense, feel safe enough to broadcast the feelings to the other, that you are safe enough to be trusted, and that you can now have a positive presence to support others. And that cascades. And then looking at the mother-parent-child relationship and seeing it as this active, dynamic dyad, that once the bodies relax, you can see the support spontaneously occurring. That's my message. My message is a sequential understanding that to support the safety of others, we have to have a degree of safety within ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm looking at Sonia because I was also remembering that you wanted to point out how to work with mothers and children. So like now using this as a metaphor for the co-regulation, we also have the mother-child reality in this situation. And maybe you want to ask your question there, Sonia, and we can take it from there.
Yes, for me, it's much more connected to what's the psychological first aid, for mothers and children. How can we help them to regain, safety under so much chaos?
So, okay, the first aid or the model of implementing is an understanding that our nervous systems under threat are retuned to be hypersensitive. So we become tuned to detect threat. So the first thing is quiet, safe environment. Quiet meaning no background noises, especially if you now have escaped bombing and sounds of concussion bombs and the trains and the noise and the chaos, that the nervous system of your clients, so the refugees, can calm down, can give up its hypervigilance. To do that, you have to have an environment, whether we call it a clinical setting or a home, in which the background sounds are basically calm, that there's not busyness going on. So the nervous system has to be in an environment in where it's not going to be easily convinced that it needs to maintain its hypervigilance. That hypervigilance has to be downregulated. That's I would say, the first the first act of a first aid kit to, in a sense, calm the situation to enable the individual's nervous system to calm. So it's a more containment and quiet rooms, quiet delivery spaces of therapy.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that you needed to give it to them, those people, more containment exercises, basic tools for the body calms down, to be in the present moment?
Let's first say that if we can get the physical environment calm, then we can talk about the container of the individual's body. But without a safe environment or a quiet or calm environment, it may be too much of a challenge for the nervous system to say almost intentionally, I'm not responding to these external stimuli because they're not important. That won't work when your body is retuned to be threat oriented. So understand that the challenge is always going to be difficult. That's an acknowledge. But let's enable that challenge to be more successful. And the first thing is, where will the therapy be administered? Can we create quiet environments? And the emphasis on that is that quietness or quiet or stillness, or in a sense, lack of distracting an external stimuli, if that's removed, the space becomes healing unto itself.
And that's why we also want to collaborate with so many like NGOs that are on the spot, that have infrastructures that they can really help to create these environments. But the first wave, it's always continuous stimulus. It's always, there's a lot of movement and a lot of information going on. So I'm understanding from what you say is like the base. We really first in this moment really have to focus on building infrastructures and creative environments. And then the therapist's role is becoming to help these first responders to build that infrastructure before we start working with the refugees. And then in the second wave, once these infrastructures set in place, offline or online, and that's my second question to you, then we can have these one-to-one interventions with the refugees themselves.
Yeah.
Am I following you right in that?
You're doing a great job. Yes. Yes, exactly. Infrastructure leads the way. And even though we are restless about wanting to do things, we need to create the infrastructure for the therapy.
And then on this, once imagining also like we have all like our phones and all that as if now our extension. And I've been communicating with a lot of Ukrainian colleagues and friends through their phone, although they were running away from bombs themselves. So we have these beautiful technology, at least, that binds us and connects us. And I just am curious about your comments about online interventions in these moments, individual or group.
Well, when we deal with trauma, sometimes, at least this is the feedback I get from many trauma therapists, is that online therapies work quite well because the client, the patient, can be in a predictable context. So the environment may apparently be neurophysiologically safer outside of a clinic. Now, remember, if you go to a clinic, you have to go outside, you have to move, your body gets mobilized, you have to navigate getting there. And so there can be triggers all along the way of uncertainty. But if they're in a space that they feel safe and comfortable with, and this is really feedback from many trauma therapists, is that their clients do quite well because they are as safe as they can get in that setting, that home setting, or that wherever they're staying.
I'm gonna ask a question, maybe I don't know, but how can we get safe environment, safe place with so much noise from the radio, television, that you get imprint of our eyes, our skin, our inner ear, those kind of things create a lot of stimulation in the nervous system. How can we regulate?
Well, so you're asking the question with a knowledge that the stimulation is a disruptor. So your own knowledge is, your suggestion is turn the TV off. And now, when their country is being bombed, there may be a sense of need to watch the progression, and because it's the chaos to their world. But I think the insight that you have, Sonia, is that is going to get in the way of enabling them to regulate. They're going to be, in a sense, in that defensive protect threat mode, and the healing that you need, or they need to do to take care of their children, is to turn that off. And that may be a psychoeducational component where you explain that as you track these things going on, your body is absorbing them. And of course, the threats are real. And what does your body do to real threat? And that is being projected, broadcast to your child through your body. So it's even worse than the television projecting it. It's now the safe parent is projecting it through their muscle tension, through their voice, and how they hold their body. And this is very much into a somatic model.
So which means we need training, mothers,
Yeah, we don't want to use the word.
Modulate.
I would drop the word training,
Okay.
because that is that gets into the level of successful or unsuccessful training.
Right.
We have to inform through psychoeducational, and that means that the parent has to, in a sense, become aware of what their body is doing. So it's literally an initial psychotherapy through psychoeducation of saying, be aware of your body. Can you feel that in your body now? And if you, when you hold someone, are you conveying that? The simple examples are, some people give good hugs, others are very rigid. We all know that. But as somatic oriented people, we know what a rigid hug means. We know about the state of that body. So my guess is, though, that many of the refugees, although they would love to feel safe in the arms of another, their bodies can't go there. And so we need to talk about that with them and literally give them real life examples of how these things get conveyed, because they will have history or memories of wanting to give a hug to a person and that person's body being very resistant. And how does their body feel in response to that? As that body to body communication, rather than creating a trusting, safe environment and saying, too much for me.
Okay, definitely we can't buy so much time from Porges.
Okay, so
Do you have any advice,
I think what I would basically make sure people have a true understanding is that threat is real and bodies respond. It's real. So it's not like we can will our bodies not to respond. It's real. So when it's real, we have to respect what our body is doing. And so we don't want to evaluate people who carry trauma. We want to say, this is real, but we can learn to manage it. How do we learn to manage it? That's the learning. Learning through awareness and learning to manage. We learn to manage our own threats by navigating into space that have less distractors, less cues of threat. So we become wise about managing our body. If we want our children to succeed and to prosper during this complicated, challenging time, we have to let their bodies feel that they are supported. And it's not like saying, I can support you, here's my wallet, I have resources. That's not what the nervous system wants. The nervous system wants a trusted, conforming body, a hug from a mother, a support. So I think what you're doing is really a heartfelt journey. I myself am destabilized by what's going on in the world. It's not the world that I visualize, but I also sit back with great optimism, because I see what you're doing, and I see actually my interactions with therapists in Poland, that this tremendous desire to connect, to help, to minimize the trauma going on in the world. I think this can only make you just feel, I sense, wonderful feelings of connection. And I see the product of this horrible experience of what's going on for millions of people is a greater sense of connection and trust among us. And I put myself in that group. So thank you for inviting me to be part of, hopefully, a solution.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for us, for SE Global Communication, community. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, Sonia. Good to see you, and nice to see our colleagues there.